Have you ever felt lost in your own home? Like you're surrounded by familiar things, but somehow completely disconnected? If so, today's story might speak directly to you. And if you enjoy stories that make you pause, reflect, and feel deeply, consider subscribing to this channel so we can share every emotional journey together. The airport was alive with its usual frenetic energy. Families juggled rolling suitcases, their voices blending into a chaotic hum. Business travelers, faces lit by the blue glow of their phones, typed away anxiously, preparing for meetings or catching up on emails. Children ran ahead of exhausted parents, their laughter piercing the low rumble of announcements and footsteps. It was a scene so ordinary, so routine, that most would hardly notice the man who walked quietly through the crowd. Colonel David Carter's polished dress shoes clicked softly on the cold tile floor. His military uniform was immaculate, ribbons and medals catching the overhead lights, a testament to years of service and sacrifice. But today, the weight on his shoulders was heavier than any uniform could show. It wasn't just the burden of rank or responsibility. It was a grief that settled deep in his chest, a quiet ache that no amount of discipline could mask. In the distance, beyond the terminal's glass walls, a casket lay waiting on the tarmac. Draped in the American flag, it held the remains of Private First Class Jason Reynolds, a young soldier who had barely stepped into adulthood before war claimed him. Jason was 21 years of dreams, hopes, and a future that would never be realized. To Carter, this wasn't just a mission. It was a sacred promise. He had been through this routine many times. Military escorts transporting fallen comrades, ensuring they were brought home with honor and respect. Yet today felt different. The usual precision of protocol and ceremony now mixed uneasily with a creeping tension Carter couldn't shake as he moved through the crowded terminal. He noticed the little things. How travelers didn't recognize him. How their eyes slid away from his uniform. How the noise of the airport seemed to dim around him. There was a subtle sadness in the air, one that wasn't just about the fallen soldier, but about the invisible weight carried by those left behind. Carter's mind wandered briefly to home. Quiet evenings with his family, the simple rituals of daily life he sometimes took for granted, the warmth of a familiar room, the comfort of routine. Yet here he was, surrounded by strangers, tasked with a journey none would want to make. It was in moments like these that the loneliness of service revealed itself. The sacrifices not only made on battlefields, but in moments of silence, waiting, and perseverance. Carter was a man defined by duty, yet beneath the steely exterior was a heart that understood loss intimately. He paused near a bench, taking a deep breath. His fingers brushed the edge of a small photograph tucked inside his wallet. A picture of Jason, smiling, full of life. It was a reminder of why he stood here, why every step mattered. This mission was more than a formality. It was a tribute to a life interrupted, to a brother in arms who deserved the dignity of a proper farewell. Around him, the airport buzzed on, indifferent to the quiet weight pressing down on one man. Yet Carter knew that within this ordinary place, extraordinary moments unfolded every day. Moments of courage, sorrow, and honor that rarely made the headlines. As he approached the airline counter, documents in hand, the subtle anxiety that had been building crept closer to the surface. There was a tension he couldn't yet name, a sense that today's journey would test more than just paperwork or procedures. But Carter's face remained calm, his voice steady. He had a job to do, a duty that transcended rank, recognition, or personal comfort. It was about keeping a promise etched into the very fabric of military service. No soldier left behind. This quiet resolve set him apart from the crowd. It was a solemn reminder that some battles were fought not with weapons, but with unwavering commitment and the strength to stand firm in the face of uncertainty. And so, in the midst of the airport's chaos, Colonel David Carter prepared to face whatever lay ahead. Not just as a military officer, but as a guardian of memory, honor, and respect for those who had given everything. Colonel David Carter approached the airline counter with a firm but measured step, his military orders and identification carefully laid out before him. The casket, draped with the stars and stripes, was just beyond the windows, waiting silently on the tarmac. This wasn't just any flight. This was a mission steeped in solemn duty, carrying the remains of Private First Class Jason Reynolds home. A young life cut tragically short, a promise to bring him back with the honor he deserved. The agent behind the counter glanced up, barely meeting Carter's eyes. Her fingers danced hesitantly over the keyboard, then paused. "Sir," she said, voice strained, "there seems to be an issue with your ticket." Carter blinked. "An issue?" he asked evenly, sliding the paperwork forward again. Her eyes flickered to a colleague nearby. A whispered conversation followed, their faces tense, uncertain. Carter's heart tightened, a cold knot forming deep in his stomach. This was a first, a moment when routine shattered into confusion. "I'm escorting the remains of a fallen soldier," Carter explained, voice calm but firm. "Everything is in order." The agent's forced smile was brittle. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's a security protocol in place, and we can't allow you to board at this time." Carter held his ground, eyes steady. "Security protocol?" His voice was quiet, but the words hung heavy in the air. "Please explain which protocol specifically prevents this." Behind him, the line shifted. Passengers paused, sensing something unusual. An Army colonel being denied a flight wasn't an everyday occurrence. The agent glanced down again. "It's just standard procedure, sir. We cannot override it." Carter's jaw tightened. He had faced uncertainty in war zones, navigated complex diplomatic situations, yet this felt different, impersonal and baffling. The murmur in the terminal grew. Curious eyes turned toward the unfolding scene. A man in a crisp uniform standing firm, denied passage for reasons cloaked in bureaucracy. A supervisor, a man in his mid-50s with tired eyes, finally stepped forward. His voice was measured, practiced. "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience. There are policies we must follow." "Policies?" Carter repeated slowly. "Which policies exactly? I've flown military escorts before. No policy has ever stopped me." The supervisor shifted uncomfortably, avoiding direct answers. "It's an extra security measure, nothing personal." Carter's frustration simmered beneath his disciplined exterior. He knew these vague excuses were a test, waiting for him to lose composure, for them to justify calling security. He refused to give them that satisfaction. A ripple of whispers spread through the line. Passengers exchanged puzzled looks, some pulling out their phones. The tension was palpable. Suddenly, a voice cut through the growing quiet. "Do you have an issue with his military clearance?" Carter turned to see an older man, weathered and worn, wearing a USMC hat pulled low. A Marine veteran by the look of him. The supervisor's smile faltered. "No, sir. This is about protocol. We must follow standard procedure." The Marine scoffed, arms folded. "I've been through security 1,000 times. Never seen protocol stop a soldier escorting one of our own." More murmurs followed, the crowd growing restless. Carter took a breath, steadying himself against the pressure. The eyes of strangers now rested on him, not just as a passenger, but as a symbol of something larger: respect, duty, and the cost of service. The agent behind the counter stole a nervous glance at her supervisor. The uncertainty was clear. The situation was slipping beyond their control. A young woman, a few feet away, stepped forward, phone in hand. "I don't mean to intrude," she said softly but clearly enough to draw attention. "But you're not letting him board?" Carter nodded. She blinked, then lifted her phone. "I'm live right now. People need to see this." Like a spark to dry grass, the atmosphere shifted. Phones appeared, cameras pointed, and the crowd began recording. "This is wrong," a man behind her said, shaking his head. "He's escorting a fallen soldier." Another voice rose, a woman demanding answers at the counter. Hesitant hands held phones aloft, the scene captured from every angle. The agent's fingers froze over the keyboard. Her eyes flickered nervously to the glowing screens focused on her. The Marine from earlier stepped forward, voice firm. "I've seen a lot in my time, but never thought I'd see a soldier escorting a brother-in-arms treated like this." The terminal fell eerily silent. Even the constant announcements over the speakers seemed to fade, muted by the gravity of the moment. Phones beeped softly, recording every tense exchange, every faltering excuse. The crowd's energy was no longer passive. It was charged, expectant. Then came the inevitable, a crackle over the loudspeaker. "Attention passengers, due to unforeseen circumstances, Flight 237 to Phoenix is delayed. We apologize for the inconvenience." Groans rippled through the crowd, but most weren't listening. Their focus was fixed on the man in uniform, denied passage while carrying out the most solemn of duties. Outside the windows, social media buzzed alive. Tweets appeared in bold capitals. U.S. Army Colonel denied flight while escorting fallen soldier. This is how we treat our heroes. Hashtag let him fly retweets climbed rapidly. Comments poured in. Veteran advocacy groups issued statements condemning the airline's actions. The airline's carefully controlled narrative was crumbling. Back at the counter, the agent's face paled. She slipped behind a frosted glass door, clearly seeking refuge or answers she didn't have. Carter remained still, shoulders squared, absorbing the moment that a new figure appeared. An airport security officer, phone held out to the supervisor. The man scrolled, face draining of color. The words on the screen told the truth the airline wished to hide. This story was viral. A major news outlet had picked up the footage, splashing headlines across their site. The supervisor's forced apologies fell flat. "We deeply regret this situation." But Carter knew better. This was no accident. It was a failure of respect, an institutional blind spot. "I don't need first class," Carter said quietly but firmly. "I need respect, and so does the soldier I'm escorting." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The power had shifted from the airline to the witnesses. Then, as if summoned by the rising tide, a man in a navy suit strode forward with commanding presence. Not airport staff, not airline personnel. Military. Major Thomas Beckett introduced himself crisply. "We've been informed of the situation. The Pentagon has arranged for a private military flight. Colonel Carter and Private First Class Reynolds will not be flying commercial." Relief washed over Carter, not because he sought privilege, but because the mission was finally back on course. Beckett's gaze fixed on the airline rep one last time. "This will be addressed." It was not a threat, but a promise. Outside the terminal's glare, the crowd had witnessed more than a flight delay. They had seen a battle between bureaucracy and honor, indifference and duty. This moment reminded them all that respect for those who serve cannot be optional or conditional. It must be a standard. As Carter prepared to leave the terminal, surrounded by those who refused to stay silent, he knew the fight was far from over. But the first step, the public stand, the collective voice, had already been won. The terminal seemed to hold its breath. Every eye was on Colonel David Carter, the man in uniform, standing firm despite the storm brewing around him. The phones capturing every moment, the murmurs growing louder. Yet behind the scenes, The airline staff grappled with a crisis they couldn't contain. Carter felt the weight of it all pressing down, heavier than any battlefield. This was no ordinary mission. It was the last promise to a fallen brother, a young man who never got to say goodbye to the world he left behind. He could feel the quiet desperation building inside him. The casket waited just outside the windows, waiting to be honored, to be brought home. Yet here he was, blocked by policies that felt cold and unfeeling. He glanced around, catching the faces of strangers. Some sympathetic, others curious, many moved. Among them was the Marine who had spoken up earlier, arms crossed, eyes sharp with indignation. Carter felt a flicker of gratitude. That silent support was a balm in this hostile place. But inside, a storm raged. How had it come to this? The very institutions sworn to honor sacrifice now seemed tangled in red tape and fear. The airline staff, once polite, now were strained smiles and nervous glances. The supervisor had vanished behind closed doors, no doubt scrambling for answers. Carter's mind raced. He thought of Jason Reynolds, the boy with a laugh so bright it could light a room, the boy who had volunteered to serve, who had dreamed of a future interrupted. The thought tightened his chest, and in the silence that followed, Carter found himself retreating inward. Memories surfaced. The day he took his oath, the battles fought, the comrades lost. The faces of those who never made it home haunted his thoughts. He recalled a promise made long ago. No soldier left behind. It was more than words. It was a sacred bond, a duty carried by those who survive. Yet now, standing in a crowded airport, that promise felt fragile. The agent behind the counter looked at him again, eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Sir," she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm trying to help." Carter offered a small nod. He knew she was caught in the middle, part of a machine too large and indifferent. He exhaled slowly. Then came the silence, the kind that fills a room when words have run dry and emotions rise unchecked. He thought of Jason's family waiting at home, the unbearable grief they would bear until their son returned. Could they understand this delay, this indignity? Would anyone? Around him, the crowd's energy shifted. Phones no longer just recorded, they broadcasted outrage and disbelief. Tweets flew across social media like wildfire. News outlets scrambled to verify the story. The airline's carefully constructed facade was crumbling. Carter's eyes locked onto a young woman who continued streaming live. Her voice was calm but resolute, telling the world the truth as it unfolded. For a moment, Carter let himself feel the weight of it. The exhaustion, the frustration, the ache of fighting battles that seemed beyond reason. Yet beneath that weight, something stronger stirred. A fierce determination. He wasn't just fighting for a seat on a plane. He was fighting for respect, for honor, for every soldier who had sacrificed and every family waiting in silence. The Marine by his side spoke quietly but firmly to a small group gathered nearby. "This is more than protocol. It's about dignity. We can't let this stand." Carter nodded silently, grateful for the solidarity. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The terminal's usual chaos had faded into a focused tension, a collective holding of breath. Then, finally, footsteps echoed down the corridor. The supervisor returned, accompanied by a man in a sharp navy suit. The man's presence commanded attention. His airline ID glinted in the light, his gaze sharp and unyielding. He addressed the crowd first, voice measured but carrying authority. "We acknowledge the error. Colonel Carter and Private First Class Reynolds will be allowed to board." Applause rippled through the terminal, but Carter remained still. His heart was heavy, not with victory, but with the cost of the ordeal. He stepped forward, voice calm but resolute. "This is not just about an error. It's about accountability." The airline representative's forced smile faltered. Carter's eyes swept the crowd, strangers who had become witnesses and advocates. "This mission," he continued, "is a solemn duty. It should never be hindered by fear or bureaucracy." The crowd nodded, some with tears glistening in their eyes. For Carter, the moment was bittersweet. The fight had been won, but the scars ran deep. He thought again of Jason, the young soldier waiting beyond the glass. With a slow breath, Carter turned and walked toward the gate. Outside, a military transport plane waited. a stark contrast to the commercial flight that had denied him. Major Thomas Beckett met him there, a nod of respect exchanged between men bound by duty. "This mission is ours now," Beckett said quietly. Carter felt a surge of relief, not for himself, but because Jason's journey home would finally be complete. As the plane taxied away, Carter allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought of the faces in the terminal, the passengers who refused to stay silent, the Marine who stood up, the young woman who streamed the story live. Together, they had turned a moment of injustice into a beacon of hope. But Carter knew the battle extended far beyond this day. It was a reminder that respect and honor are not automatic. They must be earned, defended, and upheld, especially for those who give everything. The sky outside darkened as the plane climbed, carrying with it a promise fulfilled, and as the stars blinked to life above, Carter felt the quiet strength of a mission finally complete. The hum of the military transport plane's engines filled the air as Colonel David Carter settled into his seat, the flag-draped casket of Private First Class Jason Reynolds secured beside him. Outside, the world continued, unaware of the weighty journey unfolding within these walls. A journey not just of miles, but of honor, memory, and respect. For Carter, this mission had never been about headlines or recognition. It was about fulfilling a sacred vow, one that transcended time, politics, and personal sacrifice. Yet, as the plane soared higher, his mind lingered on the ordeal at the commercial airport. The cold dismissal, the questioning of his right to serve this final duty. He exhaled slowly, the tension easing but not vanishing. This experience had carved new lines into his heart, a reminder that the fight for dignity does not end with the battlefield. Arriving at the destination, Carter was met by a small group of family members, military honor guards, and chaplains. The room was heavy with grief, the air thick with unspoken pain and remembrance. Jason's parents stood quietly, eyes red but steady, gripping each other's hands. They had waited long and endured much to welcome their son home. Carter approached with solemn reverence, the weight of their shared loss bridging the distance between them. He spoke softly, words chosen with care. Jason served with courage and honor. Today, we bring him home as he deserves. The room was silent but for the slow, steady beat of a military drum. The flag was carefully folded, handed over to Jason's mother, a symbol of a nation's gratitude and a family's enduring love. In that moment, Carter felt the bittersweet truth of sacrifice. Honor often comes wrapped in loss, and victory is sometimes measured in the quiet dignity of farewell. Returning to his quarters later, Carter reflected on the events of the past hours. The ordeal had tested him in ways he hadn't expected, not just physically but spiritually. The airline's refusal had been a stark reminder that respect is not guaranteed. It is fragile, easily broken by fear, bureaucracy, or prejudice. He thought of the passengers who had stood by him, the strangers who became allies. Their courage had turned a moment of personal trial into a public call for justice. But Carter knew the victory was partial. The airline's apology, the private flight, the social media outcry, they were necessary, yet insufficient. The system needed change. Policies required examination. And the culture of respect needed strengthening. He understood now that this mission was larger than any single flight or fallen soldier. It was about the values that define a nation's commitment to those who serve. The next morning, Carter received messages of support from fellow soldiers, veterans groups, and even strangers touched by the story. Their words bolstered his resolve. Yet, amidst the support, there was a quiet undercurrent of sorrow. Too many still faced similar disrespect without the spotlight of viral attention. Carter knew the true challenge was ensuring that no soldier would ever again face such indignity, that respect would become automatic, not conditional. He reached out to advocacy groups and lawmakers, lending his voice to the call for systemic reform. Change would not come easily, but it was imperative. As days turned to weeks, the airline faced mounting pressure. Stock prices fell, boycotts grew, and lawsuits were filed. Executives issued public apologies, promising internal reviews and policy changes. But Carter remained cautious. Public relations could only go so far. Real accountability meant actions, not just words. Through it all, Carter continued his military duties, but the memory of this mission lingered, fueling his commitment to serve beyond the battlefield. He visited Jason's grave one quiet afternoon, placing a small bouquet on the freshly turned earth. Kneeling, he whispered a vow, not just for Jason, but for all who had fallen. To honor you is to fight for those who come after. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows, as Carter rose with a renewed sense of purpose. This mission had ended, but the journey toward true respect and dignity for all who serve was just beginning. He thought back to the airport terminal, the faces, the voices that had refused to look away. Their courage had reminded him that justice is a collective effort, and in that truth lay hope. For Carter, the greatest lesson was clear. The fight for honor does not end with the fallen. It lives on in the actions of the living. And so, with steady steps and a resolute heart, he carried that promise forward into every day, every mission, every life touched by service. That in the end, it's not the grand moments, the headlines, or the viral videos that truly define us. It's the small, quiet acts, the tight hugs shared in moments of grief, the words left unsaid between comrades, the simple rituals that carry weight beyond measure. Colonel David Carter's journey was one of many, yet it holds a mirror up to something universal: the fragile beauty of honor, respect, and human dignity. This story is more than an incident at an airport. It's a reflection on what it means to stand firm in the face of injustice, to speak up when silence would be easier, and to hold on to the promises that bind us as a community. Carter's resolve, the support of strangers, the voices that rose in solidarity, they remind us that respect is not automatic. It must be earned, demanded, and fiercely protected. Sometimes, it takes a moment of crisis to reveal the cracks in our systems, the places where values falter. Yet, from that fracture, there is potential, a chance for growth, for change, for recommitment to the ideals we hold dear. We live in a world where the sacrifices of those who serve can be overlooked, where dignity is too often conditional, and where justice requires vigilance. But stories like this offer hope. They show that when people come together, when ordinary witnesses refuse to look away, the tide can turn. It is in the collective voice that change begins. And it is in the quiet courage of individuals that honor lives on. As you reflect on Colonel Carter's journey, consider the everyday moments in your own life where respect and dignity matter. How do we honor those around us, not just in words, but in deeds? How do we stand for justice when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable? These questions are not easy. They ask us to look beyond ourselves, to recognize the humanity in others, and to act with integrity even when the world does not watch. If something inside you stirred as this story ended, please subscribe, not just to follow a storyteller, but so we can preserve the fragile beauty in life, together. Because every voice matters, every act of courage counts, and in our shared stories we find the strength to build a better tomorrow.